And our top focus at this hour, a single street in Belfast, a sudden act of violence, and within hours, a city was pulled into chaos. Now, what began as a stabbing has now ignited nights of unrest across Northern Ireland, with burning homes, shattered neighborhoods, and communities gripped by fear. It took only minutes for the video to spread. A black man stabbing a white man on a Belfast street. Shocking, brutal, and impossible for many to unsee. The victim, Stephen, would survive but not without devastating injuries, including the loss of an eye. Police had charged 30-year-old Sudanese refugee Hadi Alodid with attempted murder. But on the ground, the legal process was already being drowned out by something faster and far more volatile. Anger, fear, and a city preparing to erupt. As the footage was spread across social media, narratives hardened almost instantly long before facts could catch up. And then came the night Belfast changed. Crowds gathered in multiple areas. What began as protests quickly fractured into chaos. Homes were targeted, cars were set on fire, entire streets lit up under smoke and sirens. In East Belfast, families watched as their neighborhoods turned into battlegrounds. Not over the stabbing itself, but over identity, immigration, and belonging. Chants echoed through the night, foreigners out. Walls were sprayed with slogans. Police say that many of those targeted had nothing to do with the original attack. Some were families who had lived quietly for years, suddenly finding themselves at the center of a storm they never saw coming. And while the streets burned, another battle was unfolding online. Within hours of the stabbing, calls for mobilization spread across social media, urging crowds to gather, to shut down roads, or to take action. Analysts say that the digital echo chamber turned outrage into organization and anger into movement. Political leaders moved quickly to condemn both the stabbing and the violence that followed, urging calm and restraint. Human rights groups say that immigrant communities are increasingly being blamed for wider pressures, housing shortages, economic strain, and political frustration, regardless of the facts on the ground. And while fear surged through the streets, official data tells a more complex story. Falling overall crime, but rising hate incidents. A contradiction now playing out in fire and broken glasses. For some observers, the echoes are impossible to ignore. Northern Ireland has seen this before. Communities driven out, neighborhoods scarred, identities weaponized. Different era, different targets, same mechanism of fear. As dawn breaks over burnt out streets and question hangs in the air. Was this just a reaction to a crime or something far more deeply rooted that finally found its ignition point? Police remain deployed across Belfast and surrounding town as investigations continue into both the stabbing and the wave of violence that has followed. I'm being joined by Foreign Affairs expert Pratikrit Pain for more on this. Pratikrit, welcome on the show. The first question that I want to ask you that do you think that whatever is happening in the Northern Ireland is just a reaction to a crime or something far more that was deeply rooted in the society against migrants and this anti-migrant wave that we are seeing right now?
Well, I think the incident that happened that particular day was perhaps a trigger point, but what is happening right now is a culmination, of pent-up anger for a long period of time.
Right.
We can simplify the whole issue by saying that, oh, all immigrants are very nice and people and we should be sympathetic towards them. But the issue in reality is not as simple as that. For decades now, we have seen in Western Europe, there is this cabal which keeps on pushing in immigrants, primarily from Middle East and North Africa. They give them all kinds of subsidized housing at the, with the taxpayers' money. And I have personally been in some of these cities where I've seen the kind of danger that you face in some of these localities because of certain immigrants, you may say. So what happened that day was not a simple incident of a black man stabbing a white man. It was far more sinister than that. It was an incident of beheading that is going on. And for far too long, many of these countries, their heads of states, their governments have turned a blind eye to what was happening. There is a palpable demographic shift which is happening in many parts of Western Europe, and the native citizens of those countries have the legitimate right to protest that when we have our own issues of employment or other issues of inflation, why are we keeping on bringing in immigrants and making them stay in five-star accommodation literally at taxpayers' money? So this is something that they have to ask, and sometimes it's actually some kind of there's a dark humor in it, you can say, because it's these countries which have even pushed countries like India, forced countries like India, threatened countries like India, criticized countries like India when we came out with our own immigration policies, because we face the same kind of demographic change incidents happening in some of the border districts and border states. So to cut the long story short, immigrants coming in is not a problem. Immigrants should be there for any country. Multiculturalism is all welcome, but when you allow all and sundry to come in many of these states, what happens is that all you need to do is to land into the shore in boats. And I have seen people with an iPhone in hand just landing over there, and everybody knew where exactly to go, which hotel they will be staying. How is it possible otherwise than a complete organized system working in place to perhaps shift the demography? This is unfortunate, and some or the other day the locals would have protested. The locals would have come out and said, this is my area and I have the right to decide what should happen here. So it is not a simple incident. I'm not saying that all countries should be against immigration, but illegal immigration, prioritizing immigrants at the cost of your native citizens and voters, that some or the other way would have created a problem, and many of the Western European countries are facing it. What you're witnessing today, something in Belfast, has happened many times in London. It has happened in Belfast. It has happened in Belgium, especially in towns like Antwerp. It has happened recently in France. So there's a pattern that you see all across. And the pattern is reflected in terms of pent-up violent anger being imploding on the streets. Violence is not the answer. Violence should not be there. But there has to be a strong immigration policy. Even
Absolutely.
if somebody comes in, it cannot be a permanent affair. They should stay for some years and then go back to their own countries. So there is a problem. The problem has to be addressed. If the problem is not addressed, then unfortunately these incidents like beheading will only get increasing, and there will be resultant reaction as well.
Absolutely. But Patrikita, I also want to ask you that you mentioned how multiculturalism is important, but there's clearly a pattern that we can see that there's a depleting trust between communities. Do you think that multiculturalism will soon fade in the West?
Well, multiculturalism has actually failed to a great extent in many of the Western European countries. And you see, Eastern Europe has been very reluctant to allow this multiculturalism to come in. Now, let's take the example of people of India. Why is it that Indians do not face this kind of hate? When you go to a foreign country, you must accept that I have come here, the country belongs to somebody else, and I will abide by the rules and laws of that country. I will respect that country's culture. If you do that, then there is absolutely no problem. And I think the Indians are, people of Indian origin are some of the most law-abiding citizens. Wherever they go, they respect the rule of the law of the state. They respect the people of the country. They do their work, they pay their taxes, and they try to add value to that country's wealth and society. But if that doesn't happen, if an immigrant comes in and tries to impose his own way or his own version of what is right, and he tries to undermine the people of that own country, then there is a problem. And that problem is getting reflected in many parts of Western Europe and Central Europe. You see this kind of violence that is happening. Some might say that there's a poetic justice in all of it because these are colonial powers who are actually facing the heat of it today. But the reality is illegal immigration, unchecked immigration is a problem. Multiculturalism per se is not a problem, because in most countries today, you would see people having their own culture, and that they don't mind embracing somebody else's culture as well. But those who are coming in should know that this country belongs to somebody else. It is not my country. And if I'm being allowed to come here, if I'm being given refuge, I have to respect the people of that country. And if it continues that just because if you're a refugee or an immigrant coming from certain parts of the world, you would get the 5-star treatment without any job. You will be given stipend every month to sustain your family. Then it's going to create problem for those who are actually doing the jobs. None of these people are actually properly involved in any kind of livelihood generation. They are on subsidy, and if subsidies keep on going down, that will go down somewhat the other day, because the financial conditions are bad, and then it leads to violence from these people as well. Is there any kind of orientation that is done of these immigrants? What is the purpose when you bring in such kind of people? Are you trying to assimilate them into the local society? Even the governments don't do that. So if you do not create sensitivity among the immigrants themselves about what the local cultures are, the local people are, then this problem is going to happen. This problem is not today's problem. This problem has been germinating for the last 3 decades, and primarily it is the policies of European Union that is responsible for all of it. Even the United Kingdom has been out of European Union now, but they follow the same culture. That is getting reflected in terms of this. You would see a clear distinction in most cases. People of Indian origin are generally respected for what they do in the other countries. So we can't say that it's all the immigrants are being classified in one way, actually.